I cannot base my characters off the Who's drummer Keith Moon. That line, of course, is the first entry in the 2600 Things Mr. Welch Can No Longer Do in an RPG, the reason why most gamers know who I am. If you know the legend behind Keith, you get the joke. If you don't, it's a head-scratcher. That one joke made me a part of D&D culture, the personification of the loony. The guy that plays to derail the game at every chance, exploits every loophole, and makes whacked-out characters who typically serve no purpose except to leech 1/6 of the XP from the rest of the party. But that's not the only trick to being funny. If you want to run a comedic RPG from the start, there's surprisingly a lot of work you have to do to make it successful. It's time to share some secrets. I'm Mr. Welch, and let's put a smile on that face. The first thing you will have to deal with if you're putting together a comedy game, more than selecting the actual game itself, is what maturity level are you looking at? Comedy runs a gamut, and there are a few tastes to cater to. Some people don't mind a raw joke. Even racial humor done right has its fans. But other people don't want fart jokes in their games. They're looking for an absurd experience that lets them escape from reality while living with no lingering consequences. It will be best to have everyone on board with a style of humor that will permeate your game. Going too far with one style of comedy will cost you players. It does work best if everyone involved is already friends, so there won't be any surprises. Otherwise, tread lightly, as comedy is frequently a touchy subject. Or go full Lenny Bruce and let the problem sort itself out. Next up, you need to decide the game's style, because there's many ways to be funny. Look at some of the best comedy teams and how they meshed. Monty Python took a normal situation to a ludicrous extreme. Laurel and Hardy were two straight men in increasingly bizarre scenarios. The Three Stooges were the king of slapstick. The Marx Brothers just went full-on bizarre without a premise of making sense often enough. Mel Brooks wrapped up anachronisms with social commentary, all while pushing the boundaries of vulgarity. Not all of these were appropriate for role-playing games, especially wordplay. That's great as a sketch, but rarely works when you're in a freewheeling improv session. Puns tend to be the exception, but there's a reason these are considered the lowest form of humor. From personal experience, players prefer absurdity. The more surreal you make the adventure, the better. Characters will pick up farm animals as their personal nemesis. Worse, that farm animal will level up with the player, making their fights difficult no matter how powerful they are. Gnomes will salute the characters with a 21-gun salute using artillery pieces pointed at them. Moose will have seemingly infinite hit points but experience all the pain of being injured. Every blow makes them scream louder. Guards will have genius-level IQs because every single one of them is an English major who can't find a job in their chosen field. The point is to frustrate the players with implausible scenarios while not making it too difficult for them. Then they will apply their own improbable solutions in response. Now that you've decided how you're going to play your game, what game are you going to play? There's 3 types of RPGs to use for comedy. The first ones are the ones created to be funny. Toon is the classic example of Looney Tunes style play. Paranoia is possibly the most famous comedy game, and for those people who like their comedy dark, nothing else even comes close. Teenagers from Outer Space tends to be a bit more anime, though I always run it as 1950s sci-fi meets a John Hughes movie. Then there's Tales from the Floating Vagabond, which has some absolutely bonkers adventures involving almost every genre possible, while saddled with an unfortunately crunchy rules system. Then you have the games that try to take themselves seriously, but their concept leads to people doing quite the opposite. Street Fighter comes to mind with its over-the-top focus on martial arts. G.I. Joe encourages military types to live out their fantasies of being the worst soldiers possible and getting rewarded for it, or getting to pick every weapon they wanted for a mission, plus 10 pounds of potato salad. The world of Cinnabar is known for being one of the most sprawling game worlds ever put to paper, to the point of being nonsensical. But the fact that the game was written without a smidgen of humor, while the party can face 100-foot-tall grizzly bears with lasers coming out of their freaking eyes, is ripe for comedy. For all these games, you have to make a few changes to prepare them to be entirely comedic, mainly by going all in on the concept and doubling down on the sincerity of the setting, while embracing the insanity that would actually ensue. Everybody in the Street Fighter universe knows martial arts from birth. Cops have guns, but somehow fight crime by punching people. G.I. Joe can ignore the Geneva Convention as long as the war crime being committed is for a good cause. Then you have the games that aren't designed to be played silly, and you'll need to make a lot of changes to allow for the madness that's about to ensue. Dungeons & Dragons, Call of Cthulhu, or Twilight 2000 have few rules that encourage players to be goofy. The last two are the opposite of goofy and are rather depressing. They are typically high lethality or don't give players much to improvise with because of the way the mechanics are written. You're going to need to build these campaigns from the ground up, adding the house rules required to keep the players interested while keeping their characters alive. The one thing you don't have to worry about in a comedy campaign is balance. Well, unless you're in a closed leveling system like 5th edition, where you can only give them a finite amount of advances. There's a reason all the devoted comedy games use a stat skill system for their advancement. One core principle of a comedy game is that the more tools you give to the players, the funnier it gets. In short, don't skip on experience points. Hand it out like candy. Everybody gets XP every time somebody laughs at a joke. Teenagers from Outer Space had players vote at the end of each session on how much experience somebody would get by voting with rating cards and then averaging the totals. It was an interesting system that works far better if you do that for every joke. Yes, this makes the characters incredibly powerful and quickly, but that's the point. They will use their abilities to try even stupider adventures. You're just egging them on. You want them to unlock high-level abilities, because what's funnier, landing the drop pod on the Chaos Lord from orbit, or landing the elbow drop on the Chaos Lord from orbit? Two elements of comedy, at least according to various comedians, are shock and surprise. Shock is seeing a character humorously go beyond societal bounds. Watching a typically upper-class toff act inappropriately with no warning would be a shock. Even if they're villains, they can always debase themselves just a little bit more. Like when Hedy Lamarr,
that's Headley,
tries to get the student discount at the end of Blazing Saddles. A hero might slowly reveal his foot fetish or some other secret he'd prefer not to make public but can't stop indulging in it. Shock is done in small amounts, because if it's too much at once, you can ruin the joke. It's better if the running joke is more of a walking joke and only comes up when the timing is perfect. Surprise is just that, something the party wasn't expecting to happen. This can be especially funny if it makes no sense, shouldn't even be possible, and is completely out of place in the setting. The Tomb of Horrors now has HAL 9000 as the boss monster without explanation, complete with randomly placed airlocks. Reoccurring villains pop up in places where they shouldn't be, but they have a legitimate reason for being there. You get on Thunder River at the amusement park, and Cobra Commander, Destro, and the Baroness get put in your raft. It makes all the humor conversational, which if you can turn it into a character's therapy session, all the better. The point is, the more insane the situation that spontaneously unfolds, the funnier it becomes. The evil Rail Baron shows up at your house for a showdown, only to be invited in by your twin sister because she thinks he's somebody else. And worse, they hit it off. Then he keeps appearing in the background in the adventures as her boyfriend while assuring you that you can still be enemies. Then you have to address the possibility of dying in your game. In most comedy games, this isn't even possible. If you run out of bonk and tifos or get blown up in Toon, you stand around looking stupid with ragged clothes and a blackened face. Then you are ready to go with no permanent harm. Games like G.I. Joe and Street Fighter are also death-adverse, encouraging players to take on opponents that should otherwise squish them. You don't want death in your game because the players should be worried about how their next joke is going to land rather than keeping track of hit points. If you need death in the game, allow the players to avoid it with a soap opera twist. It was their twin, a dream sequence, their clone, an alternate reality. Anything is viable as long as they don't repeat the same excuse. This makes for creative decisions as the players twist their brain to figure out how they survived after being a step-parent in a Roland Emmerich-inspired game. The exception to this is Paranoia, as fans of that system are well aware. Paranoia takes player death to a whole new level. No other game has the reputation for lethality that players can expect in Alpha Complex. Death is a constant threat, to the point that the players have clones of their characters because they will die. Getting through the opening mission briefing with a 0 body count is not guaranteed. In this case, give them memorable deaths. Nobody wants to be shot by a commie mutant traitor and just die. That's boring. They want to confuse petroleum jelly with jellied petroleum. They want to confuse jellied petroleum with petroleum jelly. They want to get shot by the Death Star in self-defense, get eaten by a great old one because they forgot to turn off the record player. Have the party TPK itself trying to determine the offensive capabilities of the common squirrel. There are always horrific equipment malfunctions or poorly designed gear like the thermonuclear hand grenade or FTL-capable roller skates. If you are doing a game where death is possible, make dying part of the joke. Most RPG players brag about their characters' accomplishments. Paranoia players brag about how they died. Along with death, you need to decide how to handle sex in your games. There's many ways to do this, and remember the maturity level that the game will have. Teenagers from Outer Space deals with it by never letting you have it, but giving you points for trying. Eventually, something will stop you. Your parents come home early. Her parents come home early. Captain Kirk beams down, and your girlfriend beams up. She appears outside the window, yelling at you to let her in, while the girlfriend in your arms starts screaming not to let her in. Ripley drives the APC through the wall to save Hicks, Hudson, Vasquez, and Drake. In short, no matter what you try, it will fail because frustration is always funnier than accomplishing the forbidden task. Other options include oversexing everything so that if a player rolls for seduction, it happens then and there. This is for mature audiences because you are taking a trip to porn world. As the DM, you will of course have to showcase this scene with miniatures doing the nasty while you perform a 70s porn jazz soundtrack to make sure everybody gets in the mood. It should sound something like this. Bow chicka bow wow chicka chicka down down chicka down chicka chicka bow bow chicka down chicka chicka down bow chicka bow chicka chicka down bow wow 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 chicka chicka bow bow chicka bow chicka chicka down bow wow 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 you get the idea. For extra squick factor, be sure to coat the miniatures in lube. With this option, players will never be lacking for sex, but they can't trust the vampire alone with the bear for more than 10 minutes. After about 3 or 4 incidents where this happens, that usually solves the problem. Of course, the party could also face the consequences of their obsession with the horizontal tangle by giving them all the fallout from it. A nasty itch, a surprise kid, she becomes your stalker. She's got a husband who's more than a match for you. A surprisingly large number of hidden tentacles. It's the boss's daughter. She has a twin that you'll confuse for her later. Just don't do the secret jailbait shtick. That's a bit squick these days. One tricky part of a comedy RPG that will enhance the humor is the straight man. Not the heterosexual guy, but the character that doesn't appreciate the various clown's antics. It's a classic part of comedy because it works. Laurel and Hardy were the stuff of legend because they were both straight men in a world constantly turning to chaos around them. Abbott had Costello, Lewis had Martin, the Marx Brothers had Margaret Dumont, Stalin had Lenin, and Monty Python had the advantage of every member being able to play the straight man. This guy will be the butt of many of the jokes. He will also set up characters with open-ended statements and give a comedic reaction to their antics. Few players will ever want to be the straight man, so the DM will need to create at least one NPC to serve this role. Classic stereotypes include the commanding officer, an uptight family member, or a government official that they have to constantly deal with. It helps if the players develop barbs and one-liners, which can also draw shyer characters from their shells. There's a reason why straight men got paid more than the clowns in vaudeville. Speaking of the wallflowers, they do need to be addressed and engaged. Many people don't have a comedic bent, but will be happy sitting and laughing at what everyone around them is doing. This is fine for a stand-up comedy show, but in a group of 6 people in a small room, silence can be uncomfortable. You need to help these people engage in the game more than other RPGs. Set them up with easy punchlines. Partner them up with another player as a team, so they can react to the actions and make them into a running gag. They want to be entertained, but they're unsure of their ability to tell a joke. Find a niche for their comfort level and help them with scenes their character can use. Be supportive of them in all circumstances, and reward them when they start to engage. Have the other players make a big deal of the early jokes. This does remove the uncomfortable elements of being in a new game, and probably around strangers. One thing you have to watch out for is how long someone gets the spotlight. This can go one of 2 ways, speaking from experience. First, you have the one player that wants to put on a comedy show every night, which turns into main character syndrome. They might be the funniest player at the table, but it's a group effort. Some of your players might appreciate the jokes, but they can tell their jokes as well. Try to rig scenes that alternate between characters to keep the flow of the attention constantly rotating. Everybody gets in a joke, and then the scene changes. The other issue is when the player is the funniest at the table, and everybody is happy watching them effectively solo play for their entertainment. This can be awkward when the funny guy realizes he's putting on a comedy show for a room full of people when he's looking for a group effort. An unwanted spotlight is as bad as someone who won't let it go. Again, rotate the scenes to get the characters out of focus. Please don't concentrate on the comic too long, as other players will get jealous, or the main character will start to feel like he's just there to entertain others. This can cost you players, and if the funniest player leaves, it will tank the game. Don't worry too much about accuracy when you're planning an adventure. In serious games, you want to strive for correct details. In a comedy game, it's funnier to get things really, really wrong. Suppose the party finds itself in the Gambia. In that case, they find everyone present is sub-Saharan African, only wearing stereotypical Dutch clothes, speaking with a Spanish accent, and the Alps are always in the background. It doesn't matter where they are, what window they're looking out of, or which direction they're facing, they will always see the Matterhorn. It will move with them. Wrong accents can be funny, or just the same accent for every NPC. Describe vehicles and weapons with layers of technobabble worthy of a turbo-encabulator salesman. Weapons don't run out of ammunition until someone asks how many bullets they fired, even if they haven't fired any bullets at all. Parachutes still work 2 feet off the ground. It doesn't have to make sense. It has to be funny. That's the key. Comedy campaigns rarely last long. It's not their nature. They're there to entertain you and your friends until you're ready for something with more teeth. But your players will stick with you because while defeating the Lich Lord might be impressive, people will want to know more about how you defeated the Spanish Ninja drugged-out longhorn steer lurking in your closet waiting for his chance at revenge. The same closet that leads to Narnia.